Welcome to the first edition of TPA Talks. We're going to be joined by the Big Red Machine, the Mayor of Knox County, Tennessee in the USA, and a big taxpayer champion. That's right, it's Glenn Jacobs, Kane. We are here with Glenn Jacobs, the Mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, USA, aka Kane from WWE. Glenn, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing very well. We're really looking forward to talking today about your principles and your journey from the wrestling ring to the political arena. And of course, talking about your book, Mayor Kane, which has been required reading at the TPA. We've all very much enjoyed it. So, so to kick off, sort of two big issues of the day. Obviously, we're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic at the minute. I know the UK's been in lockdown. You've had travel restrictions in the US. How's it affecting Knox County? And sort of a broader question, do you think that fighting the virus is any kind of threat to our freedoms in the long term?
We've been extremely fortunate here in Knox County. We have had minimal impact from COVID-19. Right now, we only have 2 people hospitalized. Put that in perspective, our county's 450,000 people. So we have under 100 active cases currently. And then to me, that's the most important thing, is keeping the virus out of like long-term care facilities and nursing homes and those sort of facilities. If it gets in there with the older population who is much more vulnerable to COVID-19, it can be disastrous. I think from the beginning, these widespread lockdowns were terrible policy. As you know, the Imperial College of London put out a report that freaked everybody out that said millions and millions of people are going to die, and no one really read the fine print, which of course said that that's probably never going to happen because society is going to do things anyway. And we also have to consider the effects economic of the lockdown. I mean, people aren't getting medical care for other things that they need medical care for. So really what we need to look at was the number of people overall. I mean, this sounds cold-hearted to say this, but the number of deaths overall. Because if we do the lockdowns, you're going to have a certain number of deaths. You're also going to have a certain number of deaths from COVID-19. And it's one of those no-win situations. But even when we look at the Imperial College of London, these were also the modelers that said millions of people literally were going to die from mad cow disease. It's a computer-generated simulation, and we just don't know. And we completely went off, to me, the extreme and just said, okay, we need to lock everything down. If we don't do that, millions and millions and millions of people are going to die. And that, I don't think that was the case ever. So I don't think it was good policy from a public health perspective. From perspective of our freedoms and liberties, it's awful. It's one of the worst things I think that's ever happened. Because basically it just said, well, government can take control of everything if there's an emergency. Well, now all government has to do, and that's particularly true in the US, we have a constitution that specifically says what government is empowered to do. It does not say that, oh, all this is out the window if there's an emergency. It doesn't say that. If it did say that, we would have had an emergency long ago that would have completely obliterated the Constitution, which is what I'm afraid COVID-19 is moving towards. Because the problem is what happens during the next emergency and the one after that, and the one after that. I'm going to tell you, politicians will not give up their power willingly. Once they've got it, that's why in the U.S. we have that Constitution, is because our founding fathers realized, James Madison said that if men were angels, they wouldn't need government, but if men were angels, they also would need a Constitution. So we're caught in that internal contradiction that you have to have government for some functions. At the same time, you have to realize that someone has to watch the watchers. And when we lose the ability to hold government accountable, which is what's happened in the situation, when we say, government protect me, that is very problematic. So I am extremely worried about the long-term consequences economically from COVID-19, and also the long-term consequences, especially here in the US, to our personal freedom.
We sort of assume, I think a lot of us assume for a long time that, Britain's a free country and people love their freedom. They love the fact they could shop where they wanted. They could go and get their hair cut, as none of us have been able to do. And suddenly those restrictions are taken away. And you know what? A lot of people have just lived with it. They've said, sure, if we have to fight this virus, then we're not going to be able to go to restaurants. We're not going to be able to see our own families. That's been quite a scary experience.
One thing I'd like to point out is here in the States, despite the fact that folks might think that we're one homogenous country and we all do the same thing, it varies from state to state. Here in Tennessee, we've had very little restrictions, and we're moving back towards some kind of normalcy. And you look at other states, and they're still under lockdown. We never went to just a lockdown. Okay, I mean, there were restrictions on businesses, and there were a little bit of restrictions on travel, but it was nothing like what they experienced in, say, Michigan or California or New York. And I'm very thankful for that. Throughout all of this, it feels like I've kind of been in this bubble where we've been impacted somewhat, but at the same token, I'm looking at the outside going, man, I am so glad that I live here.
Yeah, indeed. The other big issue of the day I'd love to ask you about is the Black Lives Matter protests, because you guys have had them over there and it's sort of come over here, and we're seeing that as well, protests and the movement on social media. I'm really interested in your personal perspective on it, because I remember in your book, you talk a lot about the American dream, and you actually identify institutional racism as a sort of a barrier to the American dream. So tell us about that. What's your sort of perspective on that?
Sure. I grew up in Northeast Missouri, a little bitty town out in the middle of nowhere, very rural, and probably had a handful of Black kids at our elementary school. Then when I got to high school, I played sports. When I got to high school, I had African Americans on my teams, and we got along really well because of sports. And we found a common touch point. And then throughout college and into WWE, one of my travel partners for years was D'Lo Brown, and also Mark Henry, and even Dwayne Johnson. And I saw some of the stuff. Like, remember one time I was with D'Lo, and we were driving in Detroit, and the police pull up next to us, and D'Lo was driving, and I'm kind of hunkered down next to him, and they shine their spotlight in the car, and then they kind of check it out for a second, and then they drive off. And I'd never experienced that before or since. And so I was like, what the heck was that? And D'Lo's like, that's called driving while Black. And last night I was at a high school graduation, and the principal, who was white, said, well, I think something that's extremely wise. It's like, I'm not a Black person. I don't know what the Black experience is like. I can't put myself in the shoes of an African American, okay? And I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind, is it's a matter of perspective, and different people do have different experiences. Now, for me, the root issue is that we have this thing called the American dream, which is the ability to live your life and create what you want to create. And for some people, it's not available. And it's not deliberate. Okay. I mean, you hear this term racism, you think that people don't like someone of another color or whatever. And I find that not to be the case. I mean, unfortunately, there are some people that are like that, but most people abhor that sort of thing. But the system itself, it just is what it is from a historical perspective. And unfortunately, Black folks in many cases have been denied that because of programs that have been put into place. When we look at the civil rights movement, and that was only 60 years ago, okay? But then we also look at some of the things that government has done itself, like the war on drugs has been horrible for Black communities. To me, welfare is a horrible thing, because basically it creates an environment of dependency. It does the same thing here in white Appalachia. Okay, you have generational dependency, which is a very bad thing. One thing that's troubling to me is I think this whole thing has been hijacked by the radical left in some places. For instance, in Seattle, you've had folks, and of course, you look at the pictures, the majority of them are white people. You have white liberals and hard, I mean, very hard left, and they've taken over part of Seattle, and it's a no police zone, blah blah blah. But they have a handbill, like a poster that I saw, and it says, "Cops will always be racist because capitalism creates inequality." And that's the issue, is they hate capitalism. And to me, the thing is that we need more capitalism. We need more freedom. We need more ability for folks of color to take advantage of the opportunities that the free market allows, not less of that. And that's been the issue all along. To me, it all comes to the crux of it. It comes down, a lot of it is just, it's people's ability to understand, or not their ability, but showing that there are opportunities out there, and then helping them equip themselves with the tools that they need to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's something, frankly, we have not done a great job of here in the U.S. in many situations. But nevertheless, it's not an issue of the free market and capitalism having too much of it. It's an issue of not having enough of it.
And that's one thing that's sort of quite amazes me about you. You speak with real passion about the free market and the good that the market can do. And those beliefs, what sort of influence those beliefs? Is that something that you sort of picked up in your wrestling career? Is that something that how did you come across your libertarian principles? Because they're not easy, right? It doesn't kind of fit into traditional left right kind of thing.
I think a lot of mine is just kind of my inherent thinking. Again, growing up on a farm, we were pretty self-sufficient and pretty self-dependent. My folks were what I would call Barry Goldwater Republicans. They were suspicious of government. They were kind of your traditional, small government folks. But it's not like we sat around the kitchen table and talked politics or anything like that. But you could just tell from their attitude that they thought the government had a role, but they also realized the government could do a great deal of damage, and when it went above that role. And I think, like a lot of people, I kind of went through my phases, and at different points in my life, I was different things. And probably I think the biggest difference between libertarians and other folks, and this is not to say libertarians are smarter, but our brains work a little differently. And I think that we do think logically, whereas a lot of people think emotionally. And again, that's not always a great thing, because my wife will tell you that I don't always show the greatest deal of empathy and ability to relate to folks. But I do question everything. And I'm always questioning my assumptions and my beliefs. And that's just where I came to be where I'm at, because of course, here in the States, we have the Republicans and the Democrats, and the conservatives and the liberals. And I would find myself in either camp at various times with different issues. And I was what I call an ad hoc libertarian. In other words, I agree with them on this and this and this, but I agree with these guys on this and this and this. And then eventually I started reading libertarian thought and political philosophy, and I realized, there's actually like a comprehensive philosophy and body of work that really comes down to what we learned in the sandbox when we were kids, and that's don't hit people or take their stuff. And that's it. We learn that when we're little bitty kids, how to get along with people. And then we spend the rest of our life breaking those rules, but we do it through an institution called government.
You talk in the book about sort of some other WWE superstars and their kind of political views, and you talked about Daniel Bryan, and Daniel's obviously someone who's got very strong views, and he's very green, and you told that story about him not wanting to sell programs because he thought that was a sort of a capitalist thing to do. But is there a lot of politics in wrestling then? Is it sort of something that you would normally talk about? I sort of assumed it wouldn't be.
It's not. I mean, it really varies depending on who it is. Everybody has their opinions. But I think that WWE is really a cross-section of society, and you're going to have everybody, and everybody talks about different things. And of course, most folks are really apolitical. They have their opinions, but they don't want to get involved, or it kind of is the way it is. So like Val Venus was actually the guy that told me I was libertarian, and I thought he was calling me a bad name because I'd never heard it before. The term. And then Daniel's pretty hard left, but the reason is because he's very environmentally conscious, and he's a really good guy, and we don't agree on a lot of the methods, but I understand where he's coming from. He wants to make the world a better place. And then you have folks that are much more conservative. So it really does cut across all the different, as I said, just all the different things that you could think of.
But a really big sort of crossover between wrestling and politics is, of course, WWE Hall of Famer and President of the United States, Donald Trump. And, one of the things that really came across, you talked about how you were actually in the UK when Trump won the election. And you sort of saw the mainly sort of negative reaction that the press had here. Do you think that the UK has sort of misunderstood what Trump's all about?
Trump is a very divisive figure, and he's a very polarizing figure. And really the reason for that is because of the way, he has an abrasive personality, and is a very, there's a lot of stuff I'm like, dude, you're right, but say it a little differently, okay? And also realize that, you have to work with people, and his attitude is sometimes dictatorial. But also, I think that he is portrayed in the media a certain way because he does threaten the entire establishment, the entire power structure. On the left, we kind of see that with Bernie Sanders. Where Bernie was the guy that would have disrupted everything. Trump was that on the right. And whatever his shortcomings, I do believe that's a good thing, because we do have an entrenched establishment just around the world. And they run things. And I think that a lot of times they think that they should run things. They have this paternalistic attitude of they know better. And it's, whether it's in the US, it's the neoconservatives and the neoliberals. They're really the same people. And you guys have it in the UK too. And these are the folks that they differ on superficial issues, but when you get down to it, what they really want to do is they really want to run and control your life. And to me, the best thing about Donald Trump is he is a disruption. Whether you agree with him or not, he's not status quo. And that causes issues for sure. And there's things I don't agree with Trump on. But in the end, again, I think that it's beneficial that you have someone who will at least make us question those power structures. Now, unfortunately, what it's done too is it's caused a lot of people to really retreat into those establishment and power structures and fortify their positions because they have such an intense personal dislike for Trump. But for a lot of folks, it's kind of drawing them out, and they start, we talk about the deep state. The deep state is a real thing. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's the bureaucrats that are going to be in the federal government forever. And that really run a lot of these things. And we see the same thing at the county level. I mean, lots of good people work for the county. And I'm not saying that anyone's nefarious, but you have people, this has been their job for a long time, and this is what they do. And they're going to be here after I leave. And we need to question all of those things. And Trump makes us do that, for better or for worse.
That's one of the things I think in sort of trying to understand over here, where Trump's coming from. Wrestling is actually quite an interesting prism for it, because you think, Trump's a showman. He likes to make that point. He likes to have that fight. He likes to have that sort of that big match with his opponents in front of everybody. And, he obviously uses that as a way to reach people that you wouldn't otherwise reach, right? And that makes him, I think, quite interesting. Maybe, you talk in the book, one of the sort of really big themes that came across to me in your book was this sort of theme of people are sick of politics as usual. Politicians who are the same, a broken system. And Trump is sort of one big way of saying no to that and rejecting that, right? And in a way, you are too. Voting for someone like yourself who's not from that political background is a way to show people want something different.
Right, exactly. Now with Trump, I think that pugnaciousness backfires because he's always looking for a fight. And as president, you have to bring people together. As mayor, I have to bring people together too. And it's not always about being right and shoving something down people's throats. A lot of times it's like, I know I'm right, but I've got to coax people along to get them to where I am. And they're just going to reject whatever I'm saying if I try to shove it down their throats. And that's not Trump. I mean, he's always looking for a fight, and that ends up being divisive. Now, I will say that I think the reason he didn't bring that divisiveness to American politics. I mean, it's been there forever. And as I say in the book, he's actually a product of the divisiveness. He figured out how to use it better than anyone else has been able to. But again, when you're looking at someone who comes in from the outside and who's going to disrupt the status quo, yes, and I think we're going to see more of that. Here in the U.S. in this next election, it might come from the left, which I'm not really looking forward to. But nevertheless, I think we will see more people coming in from the outside because folks they're just sick and tired of politics as usual. I think if you ask no matter where they are, I think if you ask the average person out there what they think of politicians and what they think of politics, so sorry to bruise anyone's feelings that think they're important people, but most folks don't like you.
Yeah, indeed. And that's really interesting, that point about sort of people giving that trust to politicians, but feeling the system's broken, because you sort of identify there's a sort of paradox there, right? That people are getting sick of politicians. They think government doesn't work very well, but they keep giving more and more power, right? Government must be the answer to this. Government must be the answer to that. And you obviously you stood yourself and been elected to presumably try and sort of break that cycle.
Right. Absolutely. Another difference between libertarians and other folks is we don't trust anyone. Okay. It's the system that's the issue. I mean, if you have good people in the system, of course the system's going to work better. But we also have a system that actually encourages and incentivizes bad people to get in to do bad things because there's a lot of power involved. And it's that. I mean, I don't care so much who is running things as the fact that they can't run much. Because if they can't run much and they don't have that much power, they can't make a mess of things. And to me, that's the issue. Yeah, we want good people in there because we want to make sure that they do the right thing. At the same point in time, we don't want a system which is so big and so powerful that it can dominate our lives. And if the wrong person gets in, they can just completely screw everything up. And that's where we're at. And you're exactly right. I mean, we can see government doesn't work. We can see that it causes all these divisions. We can point to all these things and say, this is the result of government. And then people will just say, what's the wrong people in power? Okay, well, maybe, but and this is especially true of libertarians, when we'll argue, like for me, I'll argue against someone in my own party who wants to take more power, because I'm like, you're not going to be in office forever. So what's going to happen when the next people come along that are going to punish you with the powers that you've taken? And unfortunately, libertarians or some other folks kind of think like that, but that's what we're known for, and that's what makes us contrarians as well. But it really is, to me, we have to address the system. And yes, the people within the system are really important, but it's the system itself that needs to be under scrutiny because it does not work.
Yeah, and we find that, like, the work that we do, sort of scrutinizing local government here and government here, is that you'll say, like, this is happening, and people go, well, that's wrong. And then they'll want their guys to have a go, and they'll come in and they'll do the same thing. And, yes, you end up going, well, maybe if we didn't expect government or councils as we have here to be doing this in the first place, then there wouldn't be people being upset or whichever way it's done. But I think that's really really interesting with the fact that maybe people are sort of turning on the sort of traditional party structure. You know, you were elected, you've got your own profile, you've got your own beliefs, really firmly, strongly held beliefs, and maybe that's what people are looking for now, rather than people who just wear a red rosette or a blue rosette and get elected because of that reason.
Well, I certainly hope so. I really do think that America's at an inflection point. This is really unprecedented time in our history, and I guess for the world too, but especially here, it seems to be particularly acute. It's funny because you use the word unprecedented and you realize, oh my gosh, this actually is unprecedented, right? And a lot of this other stuff that we've talked about in the past is no big deal compared to everything that we're going through right now. And I think when we look big picture and at the federal government and the fiscal and monetary impact of all this, there's going to be some changes one way or the other. I mean, our government's going to come out of this at the federal level with $30 trillion in debt, which is just completely insane. I think that the world monetary system is going to change. I think it already has changed. And that's going to have an impact on America's standing in the world. I think with what's going on right now with the protests and the rest of the world looking at America, and we've been the bastion of freedom and personal liberty, right? And we have to be that for all people. And folks around the world are questioning that. And I think this is an opportunity for America to really become what she has always meant to be, and that is the world leader when it comes to human freedom.
So to sort of finish then, Glenn, for people who believe as you do and believe as we do about low taxes and about freedom and things like that, is now the time that they should be standing for office? Is now the time to sort of take that deep breath? And you have a really successful career in wrestling. You decided to take the leap and go into politics. Is that to make that change? Is that what people who believe as we do, is that what they should be doing now?
Yeah, I think so. I would never encourage anyone to get to politics if that's not your calling. There's a lot of other things that you can do. But nevertheless, I do think that we are coming upon a time where there's going to be enormous changes. And when people ask, well, you're a libertarian, you don't like government, why would you want to be in the positions you're in? Well, the answer is, well, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So, you need to be thinking about that. And for me, this whole thing really is because I want my kids, and especially my grandkids, to experience what I've been able to experience as far as living in a country where anything is possible for anyone. And when I talk about the American dream, for me, it's a tangible thing. I mean, it's attainable by everyone, maybe in a different way, maybe not quite how you think. But in the end, the greatest gift that we have is that ability to control our lives, the pursuit of happiness, as Thomas Jefferson called it. And that's a very precious gift, and it hasn't been available to most of humanity for most of human history. And I think now's the time to fight for it, because I think that we do have a great opportunity to really expand that. And if people don't take advantage of that, it will go the other way. And this is a crisis. I mean, and out of crisis can come really bad things, but also really good things can also come out of it.
That's a great note to end on. I think Glenn, for us, it's really great to hear from someone who is bringing those sort of low tax, pro freedom principles into office. Because I can tell you, our job would be so much easier fighting for taxpayers if there were more mayors like yourself who brought those principles in with them.
And the great thing is there's evidence that it does work. I mean, when you look at the state of Tennessee, we are the third most friendly tax state in the country when it comes to state and local taxes. And we are seeing businesses come here from other places. I think that's going to really accelerate now, because we did not have this huge reaction to COVID-19 of shutting everything down and doing things that some of the other states did. And I think people considered some of it just straight lunacy. And I'm looking at Tennessee and I'm going, wow, those folks down there didn't lose they didn't lose their mind. It's a nice place to live. They have low taxes. People get along pretty well. That's a good place to live and a good place to do business. And I think that states like ours and places like ours around the world that do have, even if it's not perfect, but do have a much more libertarian attitude, I think they're going to benefit over the next several years as the rest of the world especially comes to grips with the rotten fruit that is socialism.
So that was the first episode of TPA Talks. Tune in next time for more debates, discussions, guests, and getting the word out for taxpayers.